and we're on. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm joined today by the amazing Chris Wraight. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so excited we get to talk about just thrusting your book in the screen, Bloodlines.
Bloodlines.
And I didn't even kind of really know about this until we were chatting about in our last book club.
Sure.
And I was like, you've written a detective novel in Warhammer?
Yeah.
And
No, it was brilliant. It was, it was the first one in the Warhammer Crime imprint. So there's been lots of them now, and it was really good. So the idea came up with myself and Nick Kime, who at the time was the senior editor at that library, and they were looking at ways of branching out. So there's also been a Warhammer horror imprint. There's lots of horror books that are being written. Similar kind of thing. So take the kind of Warhammer background and see if we can tell some slightly different stories. So these are classic crime stories that just happen to be set in the grim darkness of the far future. And they've been just of all the books that I've written in the last few years, I think Bloodlines is one of my favorite. It was a load of fun to do. I really enjoyed it. I like reading crime fiction amongst other kinds of fiction. So it was great fun. It was really good to do.
yeah, I mean, I was absolutely complete. I felt like this is a genre for me within the grimdark because I don't naturally seek out like space battles and space
Yeah.
marines. But I've always been a real fan of Philip Marlowe, and he's a
Yeah.
terrible toxic human, but I romanticize him so much, and that down at heel kind of like
Yeah.
seen it all. And I mean, it's quite hard when I read about, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Augusto Zidarov.
Yeah. Perfect. Straight up.
In my head, I kind of picture like this is showing my age, a kind of Lovejoy-esque or a Columbo type figure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, he's definitely meant to be kind of quite down at heel, so Columbo definitely fits that. And you know, the Philip Marlowe thing is absolutely spot on. The it's because Warhammer's a dark place, and all the kind of worlds of the Imperium are going to be grimy, rundown, very dangerous places. It is trying to capture that, in the same way that Sherlock Holmes captured a kind of very sort of grimy London, that kind of sprawling metropolis. One of the ideas with the series is they all take place in on the same planet in the same huge city that kind of covers a whole chunk of it, and it's so big that it has its own kind of cultures and people living sort of cheek by jowl. They may never see each other, but they're sort of all there, and it's trying to capture that sense that there's bits of the Warhammer universe that will never see a big space battle, or never see aliens, they'll never see chaos, at least on the surface. But they'll have a lot of the Warhammer things going on. They'll have all that oppression. They'll have that sense that this is a fading empire that's kind of on in its last years or last centuries. So it's trying to capture that essential Warhammeriness without some of the top level stuff. And I love space battles and I love big sort of politics, but it's also nice to get away from that sometimes and kind of write things right at the other end. So I did a series of books called Watchers of the Throne, which was set on Terra, set right at the top of kind of Terran society. It had High Lords in it, it had custodians, it had all sorts of things. And so this is like the opposite. It's like it has none of those things. All the people in the bloodlines are completely ignorant about the rest of the galaxy. They don't know any of the truths of the galaxy. All they know is what they're told, and that's not very much. And so they're living their lives kind of like we live our lives in some ways, that we're the kind of same level. So what would that be like? How would it work? Does it function at all in the ways it doesn't function? How can we how do they survive? How do they even kind of live in that environment? And so that was all really fascinating to kind of explore.
Wow. I mean, for me, it was absolutely delicious. It was like Alice in Wonderland going through falling down. And I mean, firstly, I just have to point out every time we talk, you tell me about something you've written. So now I'm like, Watches of Terror. I'm like, just quickly note that down.
Yes,
So you will
so I'm
be
not trying to
you'll be
I
forever.
know how to spell books, but yeah, it is. I mean, it is sort of one of the lucky things about writing for as long as I've been doing is that you get to do different things, and so it's nice to kind of. I'm always very impressed by, say, someone like Dan Abnett, who's had a very long career, and he writes such different kinds of books. Kind of each one has a different. There might be a horror book, or it might be a spy story, and he weaves that into the Warhammer universe. So it's great to try that, and I think it keeps you fresh as well because much as I like writing space battles and campaigns, I wouldn't like to always write about those things because you have to find constant new angles there. So having this kind of, we can go at the top end, we can go at the bottom end, we can try and find things on the edge of the Imperium, we can try things right in the center of the Imperium. That's really important, I think.
Wow. Well, I mean, there is a huge transference this is not a typical noir detective tale set in the grimdark, Chris. It's almost a manic energy of epic proportions. I kind of compare it to kind of like Blade Runner-esque
Sure.
skullduggery and things going on in the background and things unsaid. I mean, and then you have to have your mystery plot. You have the
Yeah.
abduction. What's this happening here? And then the other layers are, um, is he having an affair? Is it what it seems? And there's so much going on, but these characters are in dynamics, and it brought The Sopranos to mind, The Godfather,
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
The
Well, that's
Chronicle.
great. I mean, Sopranos. I mean, and that, I think so. Some of the things you said that I thought were really important, like the fact he's got a family. So Zidarov has a wife and a daughter, both of whom are interesting people in their own right. They've got, and if
Yeah, Millager and
we need to
Naxi.
actually do some more with those characters, I'd love to, because it's that sense of you have these very dangerous jobs, and you live in this kind of dangerous environment. But you also have a family. You have people you care about.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that people are messy in Varangantua is the way that people are messy in real life, that they might make mistakes. As you say, they might have complications in their emotional lives. They
Yes.
might do poor things in the way that we wouldn't have a space marine doing. But obviously, in the sense that there is a sort of realism to the Warhammer News, of course it would be like that.
But it was such a richness. It was like you delivered a huge Sunday roast and you were like, and the gravy is there too. It was like, almost the intrinsic soprano where you have, the Sopranos, I guess, is this overreaching, it's a gangster story. This is an overreaching detective story. But you took us to the Habs on a Brookside, a soap opera level.
Yeah,
We're living
yeah,
amongst everyone within these crime laws, within people, husband and wife who are, high up on the diplomacy, upper echelons. It's so many genres, and
mm,
um, this is me kind of basically fangirling, but the way that you have woven what is essentially, to me, I kind of came to as this mystery story and what's going on with those family dynamics. And I think this is the first time ever I've seen like middle class living, you know,
yeah,
someone who's not like a servitor or a slave or indentured, just trying to have a standard of life and
yeah,
explore that. And I love that we took a tour of the whole city, and there were so many different aspects to it. From the very, gosh, I should stop talking. I'll just say one more thing. Like from the very opening, where it was such a visceral scene of like, it reminded me of going out in the 90s and clubbing and
yeah,
that experience, and the way you described like the dance floor and how people move through the dance floor and drugs, and it felt completely immersed and believable. And then everything throughout the book, whether we're in a warehouse or a hab, in a gunfight, it just drags you from environment to environment. So you basically built a whole world, as well as what I'm saying, anybody watching, is that there's so much going on. It's really beautifully rich. It's fantastic. It's like the
Oh,
best
I mean, that's really
Sunday
kind of you to
roast.
say. And I think that's really encouraging, because I think obviously a lot of the aspects of these books is the world building. It's trying to create a really rich sense, and other novels have carried this on. So there's a very good book called Flesh and Steel by Guy Haley, who's an excellent Black Library writer, which takes another look at some of the sides of Varangantua. And then there've been novels since then that they've all taken a little bit, giving you a bit more of a slice of what this very varied city's like. But absolutely, I mean, you mentioned Blade Runner, and again, that was really the objective. It's like kind of that really rich sense of the city being a character in its own right, and the place being a character in its own right. I mean, you're absolutely right to say that. I mean, so a lot of the characters in this book are right at the top of imperial society, in the sense that they're not kind of being worked to death in a kind of factory, that they actually have lives a little bit like ours. So it's probably true that there are lots of worse worlds on the Imperium to live on. So Varangantua and Lecter is not that bad, but it's still pretty grim, and it's not a place you want to live in yourself. It's got lots of downsides to it. So it's that kind of trying to blend that sense of Warhammeriness with a sense of realism, and trying to create that MS. I'm really, it's really touching that you enjoyed it, but that's certainly the objective of what we're going for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you some questions about process, because often, I'll be reading and I'll do this thing and I'm like, But how is he keeping up with the plot and the structure? And it's so slippery and going in so many different directions. Can we talk about the organization of this? Because
Mm.
so if someone said, Mira, I would really like you to write a book. I want there to be a detective story and a mystery and pull these other elements in. How much direction is given? Did on this book, did Black Library say, we'd like you to hit this, this, and this? Or did you have to bring everything that you wanted to bring and pop into the story?
So I think that's a really good question. I think in lots of Black Library books, they've got a very clear idea of what they want. And I think that's certainly true with something like Heresy, because there's lots of continuity and they might say, well, this book needs to hit these beats and kind of we want these things to happen. And then we talk about how we do that. With crime, I think we had a lot more freedom. It was like kind of, I think most of the elements of the story were things that Nick and I came up with when we were sort of planning it out. And certainly there were things that I wanted to do that I thought would be interesting. So, and because it's one of the nice things about it, it's so sort of cloistered off from the rest of the universe that we did have that freedom. So in this case, it was like all the things that I thought would be in a satisfying story, all those elements, there wasn't any pressure to go sort of bring in outside things. So there are some clues for those who know their Warhammer about what's going on. So there's, without giving anything away, one of the elements of the plot is that there's a problem with the shipping lanes, that occasionally people will notice this, but nobody knows why there's a problem with the shipping lanes. Of course, anyone who knows their Warhammer knows, well, there's this enormous disruption to shipping lanes when the Great Rift opened. The whole galaxy was kind of in this horrible state for a long time. So those little things have a trickle-down effect, but nobody on Alecto knows, or at least certainly no one below the governor of the planet knows what's going on. So you get those little hints about what's going on in the garden, but there's no sort of development to that. And I really enjoy that kind of thing. I like the sense. I think it makes the universe feel quite big, that you can
Yeah.
have these whole planets that are pretty ignorant about this stuff. But beyond that, I don't think there's any real linkage to what's going on in the rest of the galaxy, which again was a nice change, because sometimes you spend so much time trying to make everything make sense and kind of make sure all the ducks in a row. All the continuity in this, by and large, was internal to the book, so we could put quite a lot in, but it was all sort of just within the sort of covers, which was nice.
So the brains of Nick and Chris pulled this crazy. I mean, that is, I think you should definitely both be offering masterclasses on how to do this. Like, it's for me, I was like, it's like Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the Two Towers squished into like this really slim novel. There's so much, there's epic stuff going on. I loved the way that these little things were dripped in. When someone was like saying, "Oh, there's something up," like we're not getting these in. Even I was like something's happening in the warp, and I know about this, and
Yeah,
and uh,
yeah,
and I'm really looking forward to, because obviously Ian and I are going to discuss this in our Bye to Ian's book club.
great.
And I'm so excited because, as you know, Ian is a huge nerd. So he will be telling me, and this is an Easter egg for this, and this is an Easter egg for that. So I literally get to hear it from Chris Wraight and our Bye to Ian. But I think that kind of dropping stuff in, it's kind of, it's more than fan service. It absolutely delights the fans, but also it really shows the love, understanding, and passion for somebody who's immersed in Black Library. So yeah,
Yeah, I think I've sort of said this before, and I think it's certainly something I feel very strongly, that the spirit of the setting is the really important thing. And yeah, there are definitely technical things you can get right or wrong in Warhammer, but a lot of, when I talk to some of the people writing for the first time in Warhammer, or fans that want to get into it, Warhammer's got this very unique sort of sensibility. It's got a very unique flavour, and that's really hard to get. It is grimdark and it is gloomy and it's very violent in lots of ways, but that's not the whole thing. There is this sort of unique setting for Warhammer, and I think all the books should somehow exhibit that. So if it's writing about Chaos Space Marines and trying to get into their very strange heads, kind of what they feel about, or if it's writing about kind of detectives on the backwater worlds, they've all got to somehow get that warhammeriness out there. And it doesn't have to do with bolters. It's not with what kind of spaceship you're flying in. It's about how you feel about the environment you're in. And so I think that's, you talk about the differences between crime and the rest of Warhammer. I think there are lots of similarities as well. They're all living in the same universe, and all the things that are going on Terra are also going on in Electra in a different kind of way.
yeah, and with the obviously the city that you've written, it sounds really like you would like to go back there again.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely. I mean, it's just time. I could write. would love to do more with Zidarov and with the city. I think there are certainly elements for anyone who's read the book that have been left deliberately for development, and I hope that happens. Because I think it's really satisfying. One of the things I enjoy reading about whatever series of books it is, when you follow characters through and they develop over the course of many books, and they might learn things, or they might have setbacks, or they might. And because there's this kind of family aspect to it, and he's got friends in the city, he's got colleagues. There's a whole cast of characters that are all trying to make their way. I love the idea of just kind of having individual murder mysteries or crime stories, but then at the same time, you're seeing the sort of evolution of their relationships too.
Well, I mean, I kind of are hoping there's an implicit, we must be going back because there's still so much mystery to uncover. And I mean,
Mm,
I think anyone watching now who doesn't want spoilers, like go away now. But so you really carefully, I mean, one of the things we need to talk about is how you structure in all these twists. And you really kind of, you give an expectation that it's going to be a straight, like for example, there'll be a shootout and then everyone thinks, oh, it's this guy, and then it's like, oh no, the reveal is it's a completely different organization, you've been double bluffed. um but you really cleverly lead us, and also I suppose this is me presuming because I know my noir detectives, we have what we think is an affair happening, where essentially, we come to really like Augusto and he's our character, and then you're like, oh, he's been off with another lady, comes back, sleeps on the couch. There's like a disconnect between him and his wife. And then we're all thinking, oh no, he's a slippery, he's having this affair. But he's actually worshipping, he's kind of getting a little bit heretical with snakes. Would it be fair to say?
yes, is he? Yes.
mean, there's it's one of the most beautiful endings. I've never read such a poetic ending of a Warhammer book. Um, and this is Milija, his wife. I don't. Am I pronouncing her name right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a vast cold world, she said. It's a vast cold galaxy. We don't matter. We'll be gone soon. Just a speck in the dark. But for now, just here, I have you. You have me. It's what I hold on to. And I thought that was beautiful. But the last two lines of this book, which is maybe the happiest of any last two lines. I love you, Legia, he said. I love you too. Now go to sleep. I can bet you 5,000,000 space credits no other Warhammer book ends like this.
That's yeah. I think that's the same bet.
And it made me so happy. But this actual conversation is him kind of trying to express, without saying, I'm kind of looking into this religious aspect.
Yeah.
He's saying, I have faith, but they say that everyone sees him differently. He could be the sun or the branch of a tree or a snake in the water. He's always been there, folded into the things of the earth. Anything else is just propaganda. So you have him slowly trying to suggest this. And she kind of hears that as, you know, okay, it's like they're talking about this loving emperor. And then she
Mm,
brings it into it's you and me, and then it ends in a love story. But we're all left thinking, well, what's next? How is this going to go? So,
yeah.
I mean, one of the questions a lot of people were asking, what happens in the next story? Will there be another story? Is he coming back? Like,
Yeah. So the answer is I hope there will be. I'd certainly like to write one, and I think it's in terms of how the book's done. I think it's done very well. So I think there's certainly an appetite to do more Bloodlines or more Zidarov stories. Um, yeah, I mean all the things about what's going on there. I think I was really keen on trying to create an atmosphere of it's really dangerous to think for yourself in the Imperium. It's incredibly dangerous. Um,
yes,
Sometimes thinking for yourself means you're a heretic. You believe in things that are straightforwardly chaotic, or you are a traitor. Or maybe just thinking for yourself is you're not like that, but you're not quite sure you believe what you're told in the kind of the official church every day that you go to these things, and you actually have your own ideas. It may be rooted in the world that you live on, its own traditions before the Imperium came. And it's a really good question. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean actually you end up being a heretic anyway? Will you slide down into something really kind of that is bad for your soul in this kind of
yeah,
universe where that's a very important thing? Or is it actually genuinely innocent? Are you, as Zidarov believes he's doing, he believes he's worshipping the emperor in a different way, kind of as if you're a different denomination of the church, and that's what he thinks he's doing. But can you do that?
Well,
Maybe that's impossible. There's
I mean, I have to say, history has shown when you think you're doing something that's just an
mm,
alternative way of being there for the
yeah,
emperor, either someone's going to come and destroy your planet because you shouldn't be deifying the emperor, or someone from the warp has tricked you into
yes.
worshipping what you think is the emperor. But I'm really trying not to go up all up, my the literary like. But that conversation at the end really reminded me of 1984, Winston and was it Winston and Julia? Um,
Right.
and they were having a romance under the eyes of Big Brother. And at the beginning, they were trying to weigh up, are we both, are we going
Mm.
so I just thought that was another really beautifully, cleverly. I mean, it's not often you see, I mean, you do see emotional dynamics, but when you're dealing with kind of space marines or heroic people, that kind of emotional dynamic that comes in relationships and someone's half saying a thing. I thought that was just brilliant, and that's one of those layers that I think you get, and yeah,
I'm really glad that came across because that's certainly what I was hoping for. And again, the thought that even when they're just in their own privacy of their own room and they're chatting about things that matter to them, they've got to be so careful all the time. So 1984 was a great sort of example of that. Is that it's such a totalitarian state that even if you think personally that what you're doing is completely benign and the right thing, even with your partner, your life partner, you just got to be really careful how you go because you could make one wrong move. You know that somewhere out there might be arbitraries or there might be inquisition, and you just got to watch that the whole time. And of course, we as a reader still don't really know what it was up to. We don't quite know what the origins of these things are. There's quite a lot of doubts about what this really is. So maybe they're right to be after it. We just don't know yet. There's lots of grey areas.
do you kind of know, have you kind of conceptualized or I mean, you must have, do you know, or like is it going to be like, if I get to write another book, I'll work it out?
That's a really good question because I think it gets to the bottom of, and I'm learning this as well because when you start writing for something like that, you tend to do individual books and try and wrap up the story
Yeah,
within that. And then I've done a few things with the Heresy and some of the other sort of multi-author series, and there's quite a lot of thought about what goes into. So we write this book now, but that means in 3 years' time there'll be another book that will pick that up, and so we've got to leave enough hooks in that book for somebody else to run with, or for yourself to run with in the future. With these, it's a bit different here because I think although there are lots of authors writing crime stories, the Zidarov thing is something I'd quite like to do at some point. And so the extent to which you fully have this stuff planned out varies a little bit. There are some ideas that I'm really confident about what's going on in Zidarov and have a clear idea of how that will develop. And then there's a lot of stuff that is left in as a bit of a hook, kind of like, here's an idea, I can put that there, and at some point that will be important. I can work it out when come to
mm,
write that story. Because I think, with the best will in the world, that when you start writing, well, they say the kind of no plan to survive contact with the enemy. As soon as you start writing, everything starts to change, and there are real things that alter in the course of writing a book, and that I've come to accept that. I used to kind of really worried about it, but some of the things when I look back on books that I've written that I really like just came out in the writing. They were never in the synopsis. They were always kind of things that just kind of emerged as we were going on. So I think you've got to leave a bit of room for that as an author, and at least the possibility of that. So to answer your question, yes, I think I've got a good idea where it's going, but it's not guaranteed it will end up going that way.
that's it's such
They used
that's such a Black Library
Other
author
authors used to say
answer.
things like, your characters tell you where they want to go. I always used to think that sounds a bit pretentious. That sounds a bit kind of
Yeah,
a bit of woo. But actually, they sort of do. Once you start to get into your characters, they start to suggest to you ways that you can go. And I've got a dim memory. This might not be right, but I think in the original drafts of the book, I think Zidarov was having a bit more of a straightforward kind of. I think he was balancing, kind of
mm.
a secret life. And as I was writing, actually working on this novel, I thought that's not very interesting from a Warhammer point of view, and it's also a bit of a cliche because there's this thing about the kind of the detect. So what can we do that's a bit more interesting? And so all the things you've been talking about are this kind of secret life that might be another kind of secret life started to come in. I thought, well, maybe that's a bit more interesting for the reader.
Well, I mean, I think that works. That was played so masterfully because as a reader, I was completely expecting it to be the cliche, and it just was so clever. And it was one of those moments where I was like, look up from book. So I thought that was lovely. Another thing that I really enjoyed was family. A family unit, and I thought it was really interesting. So we had like Naxi, who was kind of off, wanted to be conscripted to the PDF, and both the parents were worrying. And then you had like rich playboy, added, who was kind of missing from two parents who you weren't even sure at the end why they were together. It was a and the care for the son, and whose son and all of this. And we never get to see family structures really.
No,
And then like the Mournival, Space Marine genetic brotherhood. Um, and that dynamic of, having to sustain a relationship in a world run by the Imperium. I just
yeah,
I thought that was just amazing to see, and so much freedom for, the rich couple who are kind of running elements, and then so much restriction if you're just in the Habs and you just kind of
yeah.
get what you're dealt, really.
I think that's right. I mean, because Spain, the way I see it, is that most of the stories we tell about the Imperium are like the top 1% of the
Mm.
society. So even if you're like an Imperial guardsman or woman, or you're in like on a starship, you're the lowest grunt, you're still in the top 1% in terms of like storytelling, because you're right, you're right at the cutting edge of where all the action's happening.
Yeah.
And in those environments, it's very hard to tell family stories, because you are kind of the way that the universe works. If you join the guards or the Astra Militarum, the way the warp works, you'll never see your parents again. You'll never see any children you might have, because you just can't go back. By the time you come back, years will have passed, or the kind of strange warp effects. So and particularly Space Marines again, they're not going to have family. There's a very touching scene in one of Aaron's book called Soul Hunter, where one of the Chaos Space, where he's not a traitor at the time, he goes back to his homeworld, doesn't recognize his family, because partly it's the training, partly it's the passage of time. But it's a really sort of stark example that once you join those kind of organizations, you're not going to have a family life. You're wedded to the Imperium, and that's it. So the 99% of people who aren't like that in the Imperium, they are going to, of course, they're going to have family relationships, and they're going to be a bit like ours. People are still going to have children, they're still going to have relationships with their parents, they're still going to have extended sort of messy relationships with people. And so we can start with, kind of play with that, and there will be people right at the top of Imperial society on that planet who will have horrific, they'll be too rich for their own good, and they'll make terrible decisions, and they'll be a bit like the kind and there'll be people, who are a bit more like us, and I think it's quite comforting to think that actually you'd still have those human bonds, even
Yeah.
in this nightmarish world. If you didn't, then there isn't much to tell. There aren't any stories to tell. So I think it's quite good that they exist.
No, I thought it was a real gift to the universe that, I just thought it was such a boon. If you're into Warhammer, it just revealed this whole other side of it, and like added like, that extra into layers of stuff to look forward to. Um, I was There were some icky elements in this book.
Mm,
I know you're a grimdark author. I know you can probably do horror and torture, but the cell draining I found particularly grisly for some reason.
I
But I
know.
also thought it was a brilliant, because obviously old Warhammer has always been about satire, from the 80s, and I felt that the cell draining aspect, taking the youth and sucking everything out of them, kind of I drew parallels with Botox and
Mm,
today's
mm.
society as well. So I thought this book worked really well, continuing the social commentary and satire. Was that an intended thing, or did you just fancy something grisly and
So it really was actually, both in the real world and in the way that the Warhammer universe is structured. So I do think there is this kind of the idea that the young are being sacrificed for the old.
Mm.
There's lots of examples of that I think in the modern world, and it's a sad reflection that I think we live in societies that sometimes do disadvantage the young for the old, particularly when there's imbalances of kind of resources. There might be kind of unequal societies with people with a lot of capital at the top of society can then exploit those who don't. So there was a little bit of, I hope it wasn't too sort of overt, but yeah, of course, the real world does have its injustices, and I think, but also I think it was a bit of a metaphor for the Imperium, that the Imperium, I think this is Aaron's expression, is always sacrificing its future for its present. That it's just running so hard to stand still, to stop falling apart, that it does these awful things to its future in order just to cling on for a little bit longer. So the idea that the sort of the scandal at the heart of this is in large part about the young being destroyed for the rich old,
Mhm.
captured what the Imperium is about. Really, the Imperium is always trying to cling on to its sort of, it doesn't have any sense of what the future might be. There's no bright future for the Imperium. The Imperium is gone. It's now just trying to cling on. And so, in a very microscopic kind of way, that's what's going on in Electo too, and it's what's going on with a lot of these criminal organizations.
Yeah. No, I thought it was, but again, I mean, I can't stop saying enough good things about this book. One of my favorite things about this book as well, which I super appreciate, which we don't get in many Warhammer books, you gave us a glossary.
Yes, yeah. I love a glossary.
A poor little Mira, I'm often so dependent on, if you've played 40K and you've read the codex and the rule books, you know all that already. This was absolute bliss for me. And I think again, anyone who's going to read this book, it just shows how much love and thought has gone into the world building. The same as Tolkien making up a language, Nick and Chris obviously
Yeah.
glossary.
Again, I'll shout out to Nick Kime, because the two of us worked quite hard on doing a lot of world building before. So we had this big document, which I think still gets used for what Varangantua was like. What respects is it like the rest of the Imperium? What respects are different? And we thought it was really sort of important that we came up with lots of vocabulary for things like food and things like money and stuff that might not be completely different on any other planet. So this is just about Electo. And so I wish they put it at the beginning. That's my only comment, because I'm sure some people would have got to the end and kind of not known it was there.
Yeah, because you'd never know to look for that.
No.
But I did think that was quite, if it was like a marketing thought or something, because say you went in and you saw that this was a new novel, and it does look, I mean, the cover art is absolutely
I
glorious.
know, isn't it great? I was
It's
so happy when I saw that. Yeah.
stunning. So if you did pick this up as a crime novel and you didn't know anything about Warhammer, you could read it as like maybe hard sci-fi, and then you would be expecting the glossary, and then
Yeah.
you've sucked someone into the Warhammer universe through, little old Augusto. So
Yeah. I mean, so I think from memory, most of the stuff in the glossary is not is specific to the crime books. So that I think there's, but I'm hoping that for people who are less familiar with 40K, it's huge history and it's complex kind of backstory. There's still stuff to enjoy in a book like this, because you don't have to know who Horus is, you don't have to know what happened on his fan, all that kind of stuff.
sorry, there was a brilliant moment where someone gets called in for questioning. They go, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Dawn, Rogel Dawn," and like stuff like that was. I mean, I was like so excited that I knew that. But you're right, you
Yeah.
don't need to know everything. But yeah, the glossary does really help. Chris,
Good.
you're just. I'm just basically telling you you're brilliant on repeat. So
Oh, what? Yeah. It's hard not to.
I just realised it's like we've spoken for a long time, and I've got loads and loads of questions that people sent me. So let me open this, or I'll
Sure.
be roundly shouted at. And I'm sorry for fangirling so much. I think this happens in most of my interviews. I say, "Can I ask you questions?" Then I come on and just tell you why you're good, which we'll get better at doing that. So where are my many questions for Chris, right? Okay, so I think is it okay if we move on to the question section?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll see if I can remember what I was thinking.
So I think we've kind of covered this. Were there any fictional detectives as specific inspiration for the main character? We've both spoken about Marlowe. I've brought up Lovejoy.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was in forefront. Blade Run was something you mentioned, which was in terms of creating the atmosphere. I think was very much sort of the Harrison Ford character. I mean, some surprising thing. I mean, there's a crime writer called Philip Kerr who I enjoy, who writes crime set in Nazi Germany, so set in the totalitarian state. So you can see there's obvious links. How do you go about sort of doing procedural police in this nightmarish kind of environment where there's lots of kind of
Mhm.
corruption from the top and all that kind of stuff, and a sense of a society that is always on edge, that is always kind of being watched. 1984 is another good example. I mean, some sort of more surprising things. I really enjoy Agatha Christie. I think she's great. I think that the kind of twistiness of the kind of golden age British crime novels, just in the sense that, I mean, a lot of her stories have very complicated family dynamics. There might be an inheritance, or there might be kind of relatives who've gone to Australia and they don't know if they're going to come back. So although it's in some ways a very different setting, someone like Christie I think is really underrated. She's a very clever writer, and having that very complex family relationships was definitely an inspiration. And Sherlock Holmes, actually, I'm a big fan of Holmes. I like I mean, in some ways, the Holmes stories are a little bit simpler, but I also like the world building in those. So for a contemporary reader, kind of like conjuring up Victorian London, conjuring up
Mm.
Victorian society. So all those kind of classic, none of those are particularly strange examples, but those were sort of things in my head when I was writing.
No, I went as soon as you said Agatha Christie, I was like, "Oh, yes, that's kind of, that standard of, like, twistiness in interrelationships and, well, they were once married to them and,
Yes,
you
yeah,
know." Oh, Chris, I love that. See, this is why I love these interviews. This is what we find out. Thank you for that question, Philip Collins. Um, uh, 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 gosh, so many. So I think we've kind of covered this a little bit talking about the serpent cult. But Rekdar wrote, is the serpent cult somehow connected to the servant lodge from Davin? Is there any chaos tomfoolery involved at all? And you kind of said it's not been determined yet. But when I read that, I did think about that bloody snake temple that really messed it up when Horace went and had a little sleep in there. Did that
yeah.
come to mind at all for you?
Well, I'm not going to answer that because I think, I think that might be. What I wouldn't want to do is get too specific about that. I mean, certainly the idea was, and I think I'm right in saying that Electo's emblem is a serpent. That I'm really keen on. I mean, all of these worlds were worlds before the Imperium, and they all have their deep history, and they all have the kind of. There are people on this world. I can't remember what the background is on Electo, whether there were people there in the Age of Strife, but there were certainly people on Electo before the Imperium came along. And so it's more, I mean, I'll just give you a little bit of a steer. It's more likely it's got something to do with what was happening on Electo before, like, the Ministorum took control. Now,
Okay.
whether that's part of an archetype that has links to that, we'll have to wait and see. But I
And
wouldn't like to give away too much because I think for me, hopefully, that's one of the most sort of Warhammery bits. Kind of how much does this link with stuff that we do now? But hopefully, there will be answers, but not for a while.
yeah, I love that. I mean, and it can be anything because I just finished the Dark Angel, well, reading back to the Dark Angels book where all kinds of shenanigans was going on Caliban before anyone got there. So,
Yeah.
yes, the plot thickens to the planet's core. I love it. I love it. Um, Yuria Kobilica, do you think that noir detective crime novels generally serve the this is quite we're getting quite literary, generally serve the political satire aspect of 40k better or worse than grand battlefields full of crazy super soldiers? And does
Mm,
that even matter to you?
mm. Well, I certainly love both. I will say that because I do write both, and I think there's a place for both. And Warhammer comes from a tabletop game, which is armies fighting each other. I think it's really important to remember that. I think that's always going to be the core of the setting. I think it ought to be the core of the setting. I think both serve it, and I think because if you're looking at telling, kind of again, go back to this idea of the spirit of Warhammer, I think you can do it through all those various different kinds of lenses. The primary kind of story we tell is about fighting. It's about armies fighting, and we have to reflect that. But it's nice occasionally to have a minority of stories where we take a step back from that and show other sides to it. And I certainly think there's definitely an appetite in the audience for that kind of thing because, after you've read 100 kind of stories of space marine fighting, you might want something different. And so I think for some of the veteran kind of fans who enjoyed a lot of the kind of the action based stories that we do, it's nice to get a change of pace. But I think, yeah, I mean, I Warhammer is so rich because it can sustain all these kinds of stories. And I think it's one of why the setting's interesting to work in, that you can do all these. I mean, there are lots of other good sci-fi and fantasy settings, but I think Warhammer does have that because it's been around for a while, and
Mm.
there's been these fantastic books that we can all draw on. You saw like a layering of, in the way that you dig down to a city and you see more and more layers of history because there's so much of this stuff now. You can pull it all. And there's definitely space for this kind of stuff, I hope.
Yay. Oh, yeah, that's a great answer. It's both, it's everything.
Mm,
Um, At 0652 says, this is quite in depth. So hopefully, you've got your chart that you and Nick got together. Roughly where in Segmentum Tempestus is Alecto? Is Alecto aligned with a particular Forge world?
yeah. Now, I can answer. So the first question is the only important thing to know about Electo is it's a long way from the front.
I
So that
love
was
that.
the main criterion that there won't be, or at least certainly in the current plan, there won't be the kinds of battles that we see in the Great Rift or these kind of very important kind of strategic points. It's so far away that you could almost forget that.
Mm.
all this stuff is happening. And that was a key element of the setting. And I think it's actually quite important that we don't know where it is exactly, because one of the many things about the world like this in the Imperium is that probably the High Lords don't know where it is, and maybe the sector government doesn't know where it is. There's this colossal ignorance. Probably the only people who know where Elector is are the ones who come in the local walk routes, and they're like the
Yeah.
traders and the kind of. There'll be very few people in it, so there isn't
Sorry,
anything.
this is really unprofessional. My blooming doorbell's gone. Can you stay
Oh
there?
no!
Stay there, Chris. So sorry. Oh, that was the best answer. Hang on. Oh, God. Oh, Chris, I'm sorry.
That's no worries. No worries. That's fine. That looks exciting.
I have no idea what that is, but I've picked it up for my flatmate, so that's good. Sorry. So yes, I can't believe I interrupted that answer, but
No, that's absolutely fine. So basically, yeah, I think it's it's quite structural to the thing that we don't know exactly where it is. It's certainly my view. Now, the Forger question, I don't know, but again, I'm pretty sure that Guy in Flesh and Steel did say something about that, because certainly he's got a lot of stuff about Mechanicus and the relationship between Mechanicus and the equivalent organizations on the planet. So it's really good. So I'm going to defer to him on that one. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think there has been some discussion of that.
that's a really good excuse for everyone to pick up that book and get into
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. It's a great book.
Somebody called Sternly has said, "How come Chris is so good at making me cry?"
Is that a talent? I don't know.
But I think there is a gift and an art that many Black library authors demonstrate, where you think you're reading about a massive space battle. And I always think about Galaxy in Flames, for instance. I wasn't expecting all these touching moments where people were dying and I start sobbing. And I guess you're quite good at evoking that and bringing the
Well,
emotions.
I mean, so people talk about Warhammer being satire. I mean, they talk about it a lot, and I yes, honest confession, I've never really certainly written it as satire. I've always felt it was more of a tragic kind of setting. That is, so I think I've always felt that it should be quite sad. So decent, ordinary people in Warhammer have a horrible time. They really, it's very hard to be good in the Warhammer universe because it's so dystopian. So there is a kind of tragic element that you're trying to do your best, and even if you try, you probably won't succeed because everything's ranked against you. I mean, there's some. So Aaron's always really good at this. He always had sort of another author who I think was really good, and I learned a lot from, is Rachel Harrison, who wrote a book called Honor Bound, and she again in that book. So you asked about what influences. I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing it, because she has really good relationships between guard characters in that book, and there is a sort of a romance that's very difficult, because of course it is, because it's Warhammer. And she's very good at sort of getting those human relationships right and making you feel for the characters and thinking, they're trying their best, but it's really hard and they're not going to succeed, but they might, kind of have a few victories on the way. So I think there are lots of writers in the setting who do understand that, and it's been one of the good things for me to learn from that kind of thing. But I'm pleased that that's the response, because I think it should be quite a sad setting. Otherwise, it's just kind of needlessly cruel. I think if you've got kind of people trying to make the best of it, that makes the whole sort of sadness come out a bit more.
Yeah, there's a lot of ennui and pathos, and the payoff. I mean, if a book makes me cry, I feel it's priceless. Like,
Yeah,
paid for that paperback, it's pulled something out of your spirit. So I think it's such a good skill, Chris. We must keep you safe and protect you. Mark Matthews says, "How difficult is it to have such a wide universe to deal with when planning a crime novel? Usually noirs are contained to small cities." I mean, I think that's a good question, but it's not as if you are having to negotiate with a bunch of planets and spaceships coming back and forth. You've kind of said,
yeah.
given us all, like, the whole breadth and width, warehouses, neighborhoods, clubs throughout. But yeah.
I think it's a good question, because I think it probably answers itself really, that we did try and restrict the setting so that the crime element felt like that was always going to be the thing that leading the story. So if you've got a bigger setting, Warhammer being what it is, there are lots of different kinds of stories you can tell in that, but eventually it's about war, it's about the kind of the grand fleets, and it's about the armies. And if you sort of deliberately restrict yourself and say, we're not going to talk about those things, not because they're not cool, they are, but on this occasion, we're going to just zero down on this stuff, it does get a bit closer to the kind of detective story environment. It's quite claustrophobic. There's no possibility that Zidarov can get off planet, for example, because he's not part of those class of people. So when his daughter is making noises about joining the Astra Militarum. One of the reasons he's appalled by that is A, he knows he'll never see her again. It's absolutely certain. That's an awful thing for a father to think about. But B, it's a world he knows nothing about. He only knows about the world that he inhabits, partly because it's big enough for him, partly because the Imperium clamps down on information. So any time he's made to think about another set of worlds out there, that's going to be really difficult for him. So again, it's that kind of trying to get that sense that this is a really closed environment. The crimes are happening within this environment, and all they've got is the resources that are there to deal with it. They can't pull in a space marine, or they can't pull in an inquisitor.
I thank you for that answer, and I think that's a good warning to any mums or dads who are going to read this. There is that wrench, and even the atypical or destructive or protective parenting that goes on the book will definitely pull heartstrings if you've got little ones or grown up little ones. Mark Matthews again has slipped in a question that's completely naughty, and I mean I've not got to this, but he's written, "Who's your favourite White Scar and why is it Shibboleth?" I mean that's
Here's
no
White Scar.
context.
He's my favourite White Scar. My favourite character in those books was not an actual White Scar, but she was a character who joined the Legion. She was from the Departamento Munitorum, and she was a general. She's called Ilia Revelli, and she ended up being a part of all the White Scars books. And this, going back to the question you asked right at the start about kind of do you plan everything out, her role was never planned out at all. It's just that she appeared in the very first story that we wrote about the White Scars, and her role in that was that she was going to find the very mysterious Legion that nobody knew anything about because they'd been a long way out of the centre of attention, and she was going to go and find them. And so we saw it through her eyes, and she found this very strange group of people that she found very difficult to deal with, and they were completely opposite to her in their temperament. She was very organised, and they were very disorganised, and so I thought that'd be a nice way to get into the head of the Legion, to show it from the outside. But as the stories went on, she just became more and more a central part of it. And she was in the novels that followed. I think she became my favourite character, partly because we carried on seeing the Legion through her eyes, so you felt like you identified with her. And partly, again, it's what you were saying about kind of the scope for having emotional resonance. Space Marines are brilliant, but they've got a very limited emotional range. Whereas if you have a human character, and the other thing about her is that she was old. She wasn't a young person kind of in this environment. She was sort of almost at the end of her career, and then this was the last hurrah that she had. And it just went on longer than she expected it to. So all this kind of human things are really nice. So if I had to say who the favourite character in those books was, it was definitely her.
I think that's a great answer. Thank you so much. And hasn't spoiled anything for me, but has made me look forward to reading about her. So thank you so much. Somebody has written a question that I don't really understand. But it says, how do these labels affect you? I don't know what labels we're referring to. Given that you've used the Death Guard extremely successfully, in my opinion, as antagonists and protagonists in your work.
Or maybe so. How does it affect you if you've got antagonists and protagonists in different books? Maybe so.
Yeah, I guess working from different sides of the game.
Yeah. So in the White Scars books, with no spoilers, I mean the Death Guard are one of the enemies that they face. That's one of the, so I wrote them to be the kind of anti-White Scars, I guess. But then I wrote another book in 40k universe called Lords of Silence, which was a Death Guard warband, and so everyone was seen from their point of view and trying to be sympathetic to them, or at least understandable. And that's cool, actually. That's really lucky to be able to do that. And I really found it interesting because on the one hand, you see them from you're attacking them, they're the enemy, and then you're doing it from the other way around. And that's, again, what's great about Warhammer, that there are no factions that have no motivations at all. Even the scariest and the weirdest and the most strange, they have their own logic to what they're doing. So writing Lords of Silence was great because I had to really get into the head of the Death Guard, which is not a nice place to be, but you have to give them as much care and attention as you would to the characters that you might naturally have more sympathy for. And think, well, if I was one of these guys, I'm not stupid. I'm not. What are my goals? Why am I doing this? What do I want to get out of this situation? What's led me to this point? And that's just as complex with the Death Guard as it was with the White Scars or with these crime characters. And it is great fun, sort of seeing it from both sides of the fence. So writing a book where on the one hand they're the enemy, where you're trying to thwart their plans, and the other books where you're showing what they're up to. Yeah. I found the Death Guard tricky, actually. I found it very hard. There's a lot of stuff I didn't understand about them at the start. Writing a book was a great way to force myself to really understand what they were doing. So now, certainly since writing Lords of Silence, I think I've got hopefully more of an understanding of them. Certainly I like them a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's good that you've been given these assignments that force you to perform mental gymnastics in order to write from all different directions, ask
Mm.
viewpoints. Yeah, clearly it's honing your craft. Um, and then the last question, we've done so well. How does the writing of larger novels compare to these smaller and more focused novels about the lives of little people? And I'd love to hear, I guess, your personal, what gives you more like inner warm and fuzzies, or is it too hard? Or
No, that's a good question because I mean, the really boring answers, they're both fun, but it's probably true. I think, okay, so what I would say is that writing a big heresy book is very tough. Like, just in the same way as running a marathon's tough. They're long and you've got a lot to bring in. And you're also often working with material that other people have created. So you've got to be respectful of that, but also you've got to understand it or do your best to understand it. Um, so there's definitely something writing a book like Bloodlines or a standalone book like Lords of Silence, which doesn't have a lot of sort of intermesh continuity. They're definitely easier in the sense it's less strenuous.
mm,
It's not easier in the sense of trying to write a good story because I think that's impossible
yeah.
anyway. It's just as hard with any book. But I think one of the reasons I think I have affection for Bloodlines is it's a little bit shorter. It's a little bit more self-contained, but like a Jane Austen novel. That it has this little world that is then explored in a lot of detail. Um, one of the things that I have been lucky enough to be able to do recently is kind of alternate things a little bit. So do a big sort of top end novel with lots of very complicated continuity, which is great fun. But then you get to the end and you're exhausted because it's a lot of work, and then a chance to do a little bit of a smaller one is nice. And
Yeah.
then at the end of that, you tend to think, right, I'm ready to do another big kind of all singing, all dancing political
Yeah.
drama with lots of legions and spaceships and things. So it varies.
That so you can rally up your energy for one, and then you're like, "I've done that, and then I'm gonna go big on this
Yeah,
one." And that's really interesting. I'm wondering, like, as you're describing the marathon preparations to take on the heresy and bring in respecting other authors, all that mental energy to sit yourself correctly within the universe and honor the heresy story,
mm,
all that amazing massive effort and energy. When you're doing something smaller, it gets to go internal, and that's where all these
yeah,
beautiful juicy layers are coming, because you're still doing
yeah,
the same amount of work. But yeah, it's I guess it's the difference from like maybe research papers to, you and Nick kind of world building and creating. And oh, it's just
yeah.
fascinating. I wish we could plug your brain in and like see what lights up for which book and stuff like this. But yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is we're very lucky to do this job. It's an amazing universe. I mean, there's nothing more fun, I don't think. So the bit of the process I really like the most is things like the world building. It's like coming up with, and that's true. So in the same way, there's a document for Varangantua. There's a document I had to write for the Death Guard when we started out, and it was really for me more than anything else. Like just listing all the things I thought were important and kind of like, so a lot of the time the codex will tell you stuff, but there's going to be gaps, and you've got to come up with what you think makes sense within that
Yeah.
structure. And that's fun, to get paid for doing this kind of stuff is an amazing privilege. I mean, sometimes when you're stuck in the end of a very long, difficult project, you can forget that sometimes. But when you take a step back and you think, this is great, we're lucky to work in this environment.
Yeah.
Very clever people have created it over a long period of time, and it's a great sandbox to be in.
I think we're lucky to have you guys. I think, almost every author that I've been lucky enough to interview, there's some deep connection. It's not just like, oh, let me just, write this book, and, there's love and depth and dedication in and the joy of, knowing that you have sprinkled stuff in here for us to discover what
Yeah,
really made you happy. And
no, absolutely. And I think I know all of my colleagues at that library. I think we're all fans. We all like Warhammer and want to make it as good as we can. There's no cynicism about this, which is what I really like. That when we get together, we're chatting about this stuff. We read each other's books, and I think that kind of genuine appreciation for the setting and enjoyment of it, and wanting it to make it as rich. And essentially, I mean, it sounds presumptuous, but you are sort of carrying the torch in a bit. You have these great books of the past that have been written to set up this universe. And you feel like, well, I'll try and write a few that kind of continue that and develop that. Don't want to drop the ball and do for other people, hey, which is entirely possible. But I think there is a huge level of enthusiasm. I think for all the people I know who do this, we do like it. We love this world. It's a nice to be part of it, even though it's horrible.
I know it is horrible, but I think had I read the books on their own, with the guidance of our to Ian, who I love dearly, I would have enjoyed them, but God, I feel so lucky, talking to the authors. It just makes you understand how precious these things are, and how the vulnerability and the time and commitment of someone who puts something out there into the world, and then you're like, yeah, I'll talk to you about it. It adds so much value to it. So thank you so much for
Oh,
coming.
it's a real pleasure. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
thank you. I mean, it's just really nice to be able to chat. I mean, from my side, it's just lovely to sort of talk to people who enjoy the books. So thanks very much. It's been great.
I'm hoping I'll meet you again. I'm going to have to check out. Look, I've made a note. Watchers of Terror. I'm going to have to look out. So hopefully, maybe it might be a few months, might be after Christmas, but I would probably love to reach out and see what we talk about.
Sure. Yeah. No, that'd be great. And I hope you continue to feel better because it's
Thank you. I think actually having this to look forward to, and when I'm feeling really sick or low, being able to
yeah,
go and take topaz with somebody, or get into this mysterious fight, or actually see what posh areas look like in a Warhammer city, actually is quite
mm,
healing. And
mm,
I kind of understand that the grimdark now after this journey. I was like, why would anyone write about this? Can't we have romances, happy endings,
yeah,
unicorns and comedy? The art of writing something so grim when you're in a situation that you're escaping from is actually kind of cathartic or healing. I don't know. I know that
yeah.
hippy dippy and spiritual, but to escape to those places and then be like, actually, London's not that bad.
Well, people do say that about the books that they've read. I've had some nice chats with people, and sometimes people have had really tough things going on in their real life, and actually it's escapism to get into a really grim universe. But if you get sucked into that and you're interested in exploring it, I think it's maybe it takes it allows you to get out of your real world situation for a bit and kind of I don't know whether it was just escapism, whether there is kind of a pleasure in kind of indulging something that's really quite horrible, and then you kind of close the book, and then you're back in the real world. Maybe it's not so bad, that might have a part of it as well. But a few people have said that they find if you, I think it's like anything. If you really enjoy something, if it's your hobby and you're into it, and people are producing it, and you've got some tough things going on, it's great to be able to get into that space and kind of enjoy that, and then go back and face the problems again.
Yeah. And the other thing to tell you, which is quite lovely, is I was feeling really down and I was trying to apologize to my viewers for not being able to do a live. So I was saying, well, let's ask questions about Chris. Not about you. That sounds really stalkerish. Let's ask some questions for Chris. And the community was so excited that there was like a little bubble of joy that we had.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people that like your books are really lovely, kind humans. So I
Oh,
think
that's nice. That's good
that's
to know.
good to know. Yeah, and
Wow, that's really kind of you to say. As we said a few times, it's just really nice that people enjoy them. I think it makes it worth doing.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, to just sort of shoot the breeze about this. I remember, I think I told you before, we used to go to the Weekenders. People would come up and they'd be really apologetic. So, I don't want to bother you, but I'd like to. And it's like, you're not bothering me because this is lovely. This is really nice
yeah,
if you want to talk about something, because that reassures me that we're not
yeah,
doing it for nothing, that there are people enjoying it. I mean, it has it has its tough side as well, because obviously people care about setting
mm,
and have strong views quite properly about
yeah,
how it ought to be and what things should be in it. And that can be quite tough if you do something that people don't like. And we're very conscious of that all the time.
yeah,
Hopefully, we get it right more than we get it wrong. But there is this pressure there. Kind of you can, with the best intentions, you can say, "This, I think this idea is really good." You put it in the book, and actually, it turns out it wasn't a good idea. People don't like it, and there's always that risk. You're always putting stuff forward and hoping it's going to land.
mm,
But no, generally speaking, I think it's lovely that the people are engaged and want to
yeah,
chat about it, and they're
yeah.
interesting people and they're creative people. And that's why real life contact's good as well. So I hope we don't completely lose that, because I used to enjoy those. But no, you're right. I think there's an awful lot of good stuff going on.
Absolutely, and I love that we have this chat because we never really talk about this with authors, so it's brilliant to have your perspective on it. Thank you so much. I will stop the recording now, and we can say goodbye
Lovely.
to everybody. So goodbye, everybody. Um, but you and I will get to chat afterwards. Thank you so much, Chris.
That's a pleasure. Always good to chat. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.